And so today is, in effect, the last lecture. And you're privileged there because somebody back at Northwestern, one of my students calculated, that each lecture costs them in terms of tuition about $188. And so not coming to lecture is like buying a very expensive dinner in a restaurant and not coming. So it's very much up to you. You get it in Russia on the cheap. We will do a summary on Monday, but first, I want to hear who is making presentations. Lindsay, you are. All right. Uda? No, Monday. Monday. And
But you said, okay, we're doing the rest of the lectures with presentations, yeah?
we have no lectures anymore. Now we have 2 more sessions. Yeah, nothing tomorrow.
Okay.
Right? Remember, nothing tomorrow, and then we have Monday and Wednesday. That's all.
Okay, I can do either Monday or Wednesday.
Okay, let's try to do. What are you working on?
I'm working on different ethno federalist policies, Soviet Union towards Ajaria and Ajara and Abkhazia.
No way. That's, that's my original dissertation research.
Well, I was just wondering.
Tale of 2 resorts.
So I've read in Следите, I think that he explains that the different policies sort of led to secessionist struggle in one case and non-secessionist in the other. But I don't understand why the Soviets would choose one group over the other.
We'll talk about it. Have you seen my book?
No.
World's preeminent authority on comparing Abkhazia to Ajaria, one of whose students happens to be Zurcher. Come on, that's me. And I do believe, that what really changed the course of history in Ajaria was one lucky bullet. Just, the bad guy was killed just in time. Sometimes it helps. And that's why we don't hear about Ajaria. There was no Bosnia there. Welcome. All right, we will see what we can do on Monday. At least be prepared. We'll see how it goes. Medea?
I prefer to have it on Wednesday because I have another presentation on Monday.
All right. Absolutely. Up to you. You'll have less time. And Joran?
No, on Monday. It's okay. I'll just finish it on Monday, and then we can see how much time we have.
I hope so. You have weekend. All right. Now, I have the tastiest morsel saved for the last moment in class. And this is a major piece of identity which very few scholars study. Because scholars, these are not exactly the people who eat very well, frankly, and who drink much, So they prefer to work with texts and discourses, as they call it, So when we talk about identity construction, remember we started with identity construction in this class, all these fashionable theories, and how Sir Walter Scott invented wearing kilts. Remember all this story? Now people usually forget about a major component of identity is what people eat and drink and how they do this. Like, what is France without food? Like, what is Italy without Italian food? Right, or what is China without Chinese food? Well, it's still, there is something called China, but without food, it's not exactly the same. So food is a really major component of identity construction. And it is constructed, actually, like everything else. Constructed means, that there is a historical process by which you can find out who, where, and why claim that this food is your national food. Right? Because originally, national food is just impossible. The whole concept is preposterous. I know Lindsay is American here, and the expression, so real American is what? Mom and apple pie. Heard about apple pie?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan, but
I'm not a big fan either, but I'm a foreigner and I should know about this, but, so what is, the fighting for America? A politician who is running on a patriotic, Americans don't have nationalism, as you probably know. Nationalism is in Europe. Americans are patriotic. So if a politician is running on patriotic platform, right? So this is what is called, mom and apple pie. That's the platform. Although, in reality, of course, American national food by now is macaroni and cheese and pizza. This is what really Americans eat.
I think it's a combination of all the other ethnicities in the country.
Really?
A lot of people love pizza and hamburgers and hot dogs, I guess, are also an American tradition, but I guess boxed food, prepared foods that you just have
Well,
boxed and you...
But is pizza not boxed?
No, I'm from scratch.
Please. A Domino or whatever you call it, Pizzeria Uno. You really have to look around in the United States to find a pizzeria where they do make their dough, right?
Yes.
Right, yeah. And all ethnic groups, do you have a major component of Scandinavian food in American food?
Well, I live near New York City, so we have a lot of different...
Yes, you do have a lot of different, but do you have many Scandinavian restaurants?
No, not that I know.
Yeah, have you ever wondered why? No, these are exactly the questions, not to embarrass you, these are exactly the questions, to ask when speaking about identity construction. So what's wrong with lutefisk? You know what's lutefisk, right? So you have to go to Minneapolis, to have lutefisk, right, outside of Scandinavia. What's wrong with it? Because this is poor people's food, essentially. That's what is wrong. And what's right with sushi, with Japanese or sushi bars. Why there are so many in Russia? Because it's actually very easy to make, because to fake, the real sushi is probably quite difficult, but since we have so much farmed salmon and farmed shrimp around the world, right? And what else, so why do people go to sushi bar?
It's fashionable.
Yeah, what makes it fashionable?
Because it's different culture, so it can separate
But there is a real culture, yeah. There is a culture there with its own strong identity, so it's Japanese. And what else? It's healthy.
Well,
it's healthy.
people think it's healthy.
But look, we are not in a nutrition class here, right? We're into social science. So we do actually take seriously what people think. That actually matters more. So it's a ritual. It's a certain ritual that people care, ritual in a broad social sense, that people care about what they put in that temple which they call their body.
It's an anti-fast food movement.
It's actually fast food.
It became very popular too, I think, right around the time where raw diets started becoming more popular.
Exactly. So what's happening here, that people since the 1960s, look, it's the first time in history that people began caring very actively about staying young. There was a dream, of course, since time immemorial, that people wanted to stay young. But if you say at Northwestern University, we have a student union hall which has big pictures. They blew up enormous pictures on the wall, the classes from 1878. Northwestern graduation class of 1903. And it's very instructive, to look at those faces. You cannot tell their age. These look like women, they're adult women and mostly men. They could be 25, they could be 35, they could be 45. Because they are all dressed respectably. Then you realize that probably they are 25. But they do their best to look like real men. Why? Because it carries authority. You have more authority in society when you are respectable, solid. These women behave like ladies. They try to behave like adults. They start doing, this is what American students start doing in the senior year when they go for interviews. They start job interviewing, so they come back, sometimes to class looking ridiculous because they still don't know how to wear naturally a suit, a business suit. So the girls tend to overdo, their business, dress for success. But eventually, you acquire some natural feel about this. And if you look, say, at cosmetics, even at food, before, say, 1950s, cosmetics were very, very gaudy by modern sense, right? It was all in your eyes, strong perfumes like Chanel No. 5. Right? It's a strong perfume, because it was supposed to have a lot of jewelry. Like how many women now wear diamonds? Really, the diamond industry is in big trouble for that. Trying to teach you, that you must demand. Oh, there you are. You must demand diamond rings. You have a camera behind you. In the 1960s, fashions have changed very suddenly, and in very, very important ways. And if you read Eric Hobsbawm, who is our greatest historian, I mean, seriously, the best historian of modern period is Eric Hobsbawm, and I was very surprised, actually, and pleased to know that he confirmed my hunch. He says in a chapter, his book, the history of the short 20th century, chapter on culture, says opens with a statement, for some mysterious reason, such untheoretical and frivolous lot as fashion designers have an incredible capacity to predict the change of epochs. They start changing dress. Right? Just look, European absolutist monarchy is the period when gentlemen wore wigs. Wigs become important, widespread really in the 1630s, and they endure until the French Revolution. French Revolution starts in wigs. But a few years later, even in the height of Napoleonic Wars, even opponents of the French Revolution no longer wear wigs, and by the, say, 1810s, 1820s, nobody has wigs except judges in England. And you have a new kind of pattern of fashion when gentlemen wear now, big mustache, this kind of beard, that kind of beard, the kind of long coats, and it all goes until about 1914. And then 1914, booms, it changes again. And the same for women. Right? And 1914 fashion, which is mostly military fashion, men wear bomber jackets, now leather jackets or trench coats, the uniform of secret police, kind of quintessential 20th century. And women are also, such a very important thing as Americans call brassiere. First marketed in 1913. It's amazing. Before that, you needed to have a corset, right? And corset, you need to have a chambermaid. You really cannot put that on. So you have to be a woman of upper society, to look attractive and not embarrassing in public. Or you have to be a woman of low society, so that you wear flowing blouses and big skirts, which hide your anatomy, right? And now, so what is bra? It's an office uniform. You can go to university with this. So this is before feminism, really. But it's there. And then look, this fashion in 1959 ends all over the world. 1960s, just look at what 1960s do. That after the epitome would be that the Beatles, Abbey Road, right? So people wear what? Blue jeans is uniform of American farmers. Flip-flops, or in Russian, who knows, what flip-flops are called in Russian? Vietnamki. Really? Vietnamki. I don't know, it's very revealing actually. And so many people start wearing, this checkered shapka arafatka, they're called in Russian, or kufiya, right? Kufiyas, or South American ponchos. Yeah, and long hair, no. But girls actually girls were expected to have long braids, but now they cut them short. Boys were expected to have a buzz cut, but now they grow long hair. So you have violation of norms. And but that's bell bottoms and embroideries. This is already within a more general pattern, that less formal dress. And people start paying a lot of attention to their youthfulness. So it's for the first time it became actually good for business to look younger than you actually are. So this is where you get, Botox, eventually, all these, facelifts. This is where you get new, very profound shift, in social habits. That watch American sitcom from the 50s. So somebody enters a room, and almost immediately, a new character enters a room, and he either gets himself a decanter with whiskey, with bourbon or something, or the lady of the house asks, the question probably you don't even know how to ask any longer. What should I mix you? What should I mix you? And he plunges in a chair, lights a cigarette indoors, like, with a glass of whiskey. And then, people start drinking a lot of mineral water. It's Evian all over, right? Or the most successful commercial design of any American university ever. It's nothing high tech. It's not nanotechnology. It's Gatorade. It's the lemonade created by University of Florida for the alligators, the team, Gatorade. Commercially, by far, the most successful scientific design of any American university. Yeah, because people are exercising. And just enormous, do you realize, you don't probably, because to you it's daily life. So how enormous is the industry of exercise and healthy food? That's where it comes to. Healthy and also ethnic food. A lot of ethnic food restaurants, this is when Ethiopian restaurants become possible. So you see the shift? It's the first time that youth gained power in the 1960s. And that's why, it's part of that is feminism. And all the lifestyles and much of what we call postmodernism is really there. So when one big centralized culture is collapsing. Now, the Soviet Union was not at all immune to that. Actually, it is almost puzzling to what extent the Soviet Union was following all these twists of fashion. Because presumably the Soviet Union was a totalitarian and very controlled society, and there was a huge iron curtain around it. And how would the people know about the blue jeans? Or actually, Michael Urban, in my view, one of the best American political scientists, who is also a blues guitar player and a teacher of, I think he teaches at Imares here, right? He's at least a friend of this university. Mike Urban is an enormous tall guy with long hair in Washington at a panel in the 1990s, when in Congress on the Hill. We were asked questions like, what was the expenditure of federal dollars authorized during Cold War that helped to bring down the ugly Soviet Union? So did America contribute at all? The question was very, very demanding. Did America at all contribute to the collapse of communism? And Mike Urban had you can keep it real. Может быть, вырежем, а может быть, оставим, чтобы было видно, какая у нас дисциплина. You're on tape, smile. Yeah. Okay, back to Mike Urban. Michael Urban. Okay, let me stand up so that I attract more attention. Michael Urban answered to this, ma'am, I have two words. Very destructive weapons of the United States in their struggle against communism were blue jeans and rock and roll. But federal government and the Congress had nothing to do with either of them. This is really what happened actually, why I do believe, that this is something very, very profound, that in the 1980s, communism collapses without any resistance actually. No general marched on Moscow to prevent the dissolution of Soviet Union. This is really puzzling, that all these communists in East Germany in Prague, who were prepared to use machine guns. Have you seen, The Life of Others, such films? So where was Stasi? What the hell was happening? That Stasi gave up suddenly. And why did this happen? I do believe because of this very profound subterranean change, which we don't notice because it's everywhere. That we take it for granted, that people do wear blue jeans. Just look at you. The way I'm thinking, yeah, I'm the only exceptional person here because I'm socially probably quite conservative, and my wife takes care, that I do look like a professor still. Which means, looking like a professor today, at least in Russia, is looking like you are from the 50s, right? You still know how to wear a necktie. But this is not a necktie from Armani, from something, speaking of habitus, of Pierre Bourdieu and that stuff. How the things we are surrounded for, how do they get to us? So why we select certain fashions and certain practices. There are very deep sociological theories about it, but I'm going to use very simple examples of food to show how it goes into construction of identities and how it actually becomes very important. All right, let me start with first, the question is American food is notoriously bland. Why? Like Americans themselves make so many jokes about beer tasting like, beer flavored water with bubbles. That bread doesn't taste like in Europe. What happened? You have so many Germans immigrating to the United States. So many Poles. So there should be peoples with traditions of making beer and sausage. So why Oscar Mayer sausage tastes like rubber?
Mass production. So
mass production.
Quality, not quantity, or quantity, not quality.
Yes, it's mass production. Yes. How do you subsidize certain food industries? Yeah. Yes. Very good. You're on the track.
Corn is heavily subsidized, and therefore it makes making corn syrup and everything with corn easy and cheap to make for
Corn syrup.
and beef.
And beef. A lot of beef. Yeah. And where do Americans get their food from? Like where do you go for groceries?
Grocery stores.
Yes. And grocery stores are what size? Huge, just compare it to, yeah, compare it to the grocery stores here, still, right? So the grocery stores are very, very big, and they're essentially industrial factories. They're industrial distribution. Well, the pinnacle of that is something like Costco or Sam's Club, right? As these are literally, they don't even pretend that they're a store. It's a warehouse. And all food is designed not for taste. Food is designed for transportability in time and in space. That it should not perish. All this miracle, Wonder Bread, that can last weeks, right? Milk, and we're talking about, the period, once again, until they say 1980s, because it's before they emerge microbreweries and small coffee shops. The times when Americans drank coffee from big buckets. From dripping machines, and that's why big mugs everywhere. How do you make people who, majority of whom are coming from Europe, from different places in Europe, how do you make them forget how they cooked? Well, by seducing them with cheaper prices, with advertisement, with construction of identity, that this is American food. If you pay attention to the American advertisement of say 1920s, 1930s, it's actually very interesting. What they advertise. Popcorn, and of course, the pinnacle of all is Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, right? All the advertisement. So this is becoming American, and you have to understand, that who are the people also emigrating to the United States, and it's very important. Europeans, but poor Europeans. Poor, and poor also means usually uneducated Europeans, right? You heard this expression, dukes did not immigrate. Although some probably did, but majority of these people are coming from some village in Ireland or in Sicily or in Greece or in Poland, and they're so happy that they made it in the 20s and 30s, they're so happy, that their children are becoming like normal Americans. With Germans, of course, there is a huge pressure also to forget that you are German at some point, because you probably know in some American states to this day it is illegal to teach German in high school. I think in Nebraska, since 1917, not even earlier 1916, people. So I live in a German area of Chicago, formerly German. So you can see, that some names of streets are still there, some are not. But people, you can see how people are changing their names. Schneiders become Snyders, Schmidt becomes Smith, and so. German. You cannot have Oktoberfest in America until the 1990s, really. I don't know, up to a very late point. So you have to be American, like a normal American, like everyone else. And that means that this is the country of victorious corporations. They're big, they won, and they can actually present what is comfortable for them to make. And imagine, this is not only transportability of goods. These are breeds of chicken. Heard about broiler chicken? There's a special breeds which were created just for industrial purposes. There are two important. When you go shopping, how can you tell a broiler chicken from a normal chicken? Although you've probably never seen a normal chicken, except if you come from another country. Legs. You look at the legs. Broilers have very fat, well, that's what Americans call drumsticks. They have thighs. That's why Americans call, drumsticks, those parts. So in Russia, they're called noshki busha. Heard this expression? The legs of Bush, of George Bush, because these are chicken thighs, frozen chicken thighs, which were exported massively from the United States to Russia in the early 1990s. And that was the cheapest of meats here, and immediately, and it was, the tasteless, but people are broke at the time, and so this was dubbed, noshki busha, what Americans call, thighs or drumsticks, right? Now, broilers have fat legs, not fat, but they're big. They don't have much fat, but they're big. Why? Because this breed of chicken is designed to grow very, very fast. Why? Because you save on feed. Yeah, and then you feed them at some point, and you start feeding. They started feeding all kinds of awful stuff, very anti-environmental. But this is very, very much like Ford Motors production. So you are supposed to churn out many identical chicken. Why are they white? Who knows? Why chicken and turkeys are white? Because
juicier?
No, because when you miss a feather, when you're processing them and you miss a feather, and white feather doesn't stick out so much, as a colored feather. So they don't look like badly processed, and they are actually badly processed. Yeah. So that's why they bred them white. So they were breeding them for fast development, so that they can be slaughtered within 3 months or 2 or 3 months. And you start the next cycle, so smaller chicks are coming into the factory again. Same with pigs. And same with veal, as you know, all this ugly stuff, But this is basically what? This is industrialization of food production in the world, right? And why French food still tastes good?
It's World Heritage.
Because of, by now you should know that I see class struggle everywhere. Because French Republic, what created the bistro? You're absolutely right, But actually, before the 1870s, there were no bistro. Bistro, yeah, it's from Russian bistro. But they really proliferate in the 1870s. Before that, there were restaurants. Bistro is, what is bistro?
It means fast, so maybe food from war?
No.
It's a legend that Russian Cossacks were they camped.
That's a legend. Yeah, and said, bistro, bistro. French actually don't like that legend, as I discovered in one of bistro. Look, or brasseries, so why you have so many cafes in Paris or elsewhere, all around France? These are outlets for peasants to bring their food and sell in town. So you bring your herbs from your farm and you sell them in town, and you haven't sold out everything, so you leave your daughter. That was the typical way of establishing a bistro. You leave your daughter behind, who rents an apartment in Paris, and she sells whatever, and she starts making sandwiches, what Americans would call sandwiches, food using cheaper food. Actually, it's fast food. Yeah, it's bistro. For people who are on the move. This is not a restaurant. What is restaurant? Restaurant is a very bourgeois establishment. Specifically, really bourgeois, not feudal. Feudal lords in medieval times had their own cooks in castles. Restaurant is people coming together through the market mechanism and buying relatively expensive but medium priced, really, piece of time by this famous cook. You can come for one evening to a restaurant and you share the restaurant with several other patrons. So this is a fundamentally bourgeois idea. You don't have this cook at home. Structurally, it's exactly the same as Mozart and Paganini in music. Right? So who is Mozart? Now, his father still was a musician to Bishop of Salzburg. Right? But Mozart is a touring, a concert star. He goes around the world, and what is a concert? Or what is theater? Open theater, public theater, that people buy shares, essentially. It's a society by shares. It's a small, lasting, 2 hours, but people buy shares, to be present in the hall of a great musician. Anyone can come who can buy a ticket. Unlike, say, Bishop of Salzburg inviting guests. So you see the difference. Like Bishop of Salzburg or any other bishop or great king certainly had his own cook as well, maybe several cooks. And they also invented, great food, but that great food could be savored only by the bishop himself and his guests. Right? But in this case, restaurant is very bourgeois, and bistro and brasserie is kind of stepped down. It's for kind of lower class and working class in towns. Still good food, but why bistro are not present in the United States? Why American? You already said it. American farmers, where are American farmers? They're very, very big farms, right? It's agribusiness.
Although it's becoming really, I would say now it's becoming very popular to go back to farmers market.
Yeah, absolutely. And who?
Whole Foods just made a huge.
Sure, but very, very good. But don't you see that whole food movement is all this bio? Do you understand? In Europe, you call this biological food, biologique, environmentally safe, sustainable food, right? That free-range chicken, vegetarian-fed chicken, right? No veal. All this stuff is actually also a result of 1968. This is very much like the movement of the 1968 of blue jeans, closer to peoples of the third world, and that's why fair trade, right? All this, So one of my students did research on people who buy hybrid cars in Chicago. Hybrid cars, electrical, electrical and mechanical and gas, and they're more expensive. So this is not an economic choice. So where would he go to interview people? Where are you going to find a number of such people who have hybrid cars? You go to the Whole Foods parking lot. Whole Foods is this environmental chain in the United States. And it's good food, but it's at least twice as expensive as in an ordinary supermarket. Sometimes it's 3 times more expensive. Yeah, so you see that, and then it gets a lot from Europe, that this is not for common Joe. Yeah, this is actually very interesting. So you see that this is a lifestyle of American intelligentsia, and what Russians would call intelligentsia, yeah. American intelligentsia can afford to pay for that and feel good about eating something which was sustainably harvested by Brazilian natives in Amazonia, acai berries, right? Although usually economically actually doesn't do any good to anyone. Like recycling, it's proven that recycling is actually damaging to the environment, more damaging than. But it's a social ritual. You feel good about this. Now, why the French have a decentralized, to this day, a very decentralized, they have big supermarkets, you know, but they have lots of kind of mom and pop restaurants and shops. Why? Because I think this was the policy of the Third Republic in the 1870s. You know, France is defeated by Germans in 1870. You know, then they have a civil war, the Commune of Paris, and after that the French had a very, very shaky government, which eventually becomes Gambetta. You know this political history, the Third Republic. But if you asked a French political analyst back in the 1870s, so who's going to win? Like everybody would say, of course, you know, sure, we have a restoration of monarchy again. There will be, the question simply was whether this will be Bourbon dynasty, you know, real hardcore monarchy. It will be Orleanist, more liberal monarchy, or will it be actually something else like another Napoleon Bonaparte, an empire? But instead, you have this very, very democratic, actually left-wing radical republic. And how do they reach into, how do they grow roots? I mean, almost literally. It was the policy of the Third French Republic to win peasants on their side. Because otherwise peasants will be voting for their conservative Catholic priests and local notables in their countryside. So you will have basically what you have in Bavaria, you know, or in Austria. So peasant areas are Catholic and very conservative, and central government, it remains only to hate them. You know about Kulturkampf in Germany, you know, just Bismarck hated Bavaria for this reason. Social Democrats, always very suspicious of Bavaria. And at the same time, of course, you know, this is where you get your Nazis from. In France. And by the way, what's the difference between Germany and Scandinavia? That in Scandinavia, there was no such divide between villagers and people from towns. And social democrats, Scandinavian social democracy, from the very beginning was inducting a lot of farmers and fishers into their ranks. So that's basically the difference between Denmark and Germany. In Germany, socialists never cared even to talk to peasants, because peasants were, you know, this deeply agrarian, Catholic, mostly Catholic. In Germany, peasants are usually in the south and they're more Catholic. You know. Social democrats were in big towns and mostly Lutheran, though mostly Protestant in the north. In France, it's actually an almost accident of history, you know, that French Republic did a lot to make sure that peasants are happier. And making them happier was bringing them with certain guarantees into the market. And that's where you get all these, you know, controlled origin area. So government certifies that it's not only wine. So you probably know that only butter from Isigny can be called beurre d'Isigny, right? Or the real Calvados comes only from just some area in Bretagne. So they invented for almost every area of France something which was marketable by local peasants. Some more substantial local peasants, right? And that created and then a lot of tax guarantees for this, you know. So next time when you visit a French restaurant or brasserie, think about politics. Okay, it's very political. Now, if you ever happen to be in London, where are you going to eat? Ever thought about this? Like, you know, notoriously, you know, all these jokes about an airplane is coming in a flight from Paris to London, and before landing, the flight attendant says, "We're arriving in London. Please tighten your belts." And of course, you know, the English say, "Why the French always have to poke fun at our food? You know, tighten your seat belts. We're arriving in London." So, what is actually, you know, good food in a place like London? What would that be? It would be mostly Indian food, right? You know, people arrive there and they eat what? Curry. So this is food from British Empire, right? You know, most of it is coming from Empire. And I mentioned already, you know, that English language today is permeated by words from Indian languages, you know, like shampoo. You know, you would never think about it, but shampoo comes from Hindi. Not to mention, of course, you know, chapatis and, you know, all kinds of food items. So Russian language today is just as permeated by Caucasus titles. So for Russia, Caucasus is basically what India is for Britain. And probably even more, because India, I don't think, ever had such a high status in British mental map, while the Caucasus, especially, of course, the Georgian cinema, which you are going to watch today, it's not exactly Georgian, but in Georgian, Armenian music, those were the, those were, of course, the highest, some of the highest achievements of Soviet culture. So this was in the pantheon. You have to realize that Aram Khachaturian, right, was pride of the whole Soviet Union. Or you heard about maybe Tigran Petrosyan, who was the world chess champion. And to this day, you probably know that Garry Kasparov, he's not very ethnic, but he's at least half Armenian. And famous Georgian football players. David Kipiani, these are legends of Soviet times. But at the high level, of course, there's, it's Georgian poetry, it's Georgian film. Above all, it's Georgian film. Those of you who know Russian somewhat better, you should really try and read, who was Mandelstam, Osip Mandelstam, his poems from Armenia. Wonderful, very powerful poems from the early 1930s. Osip Mandelstam writing about Armenia. This is actually what shaped the perception of so many in of Russian intelligentsia. So they come and ask. At first, I didn't know that poetry, because people go, "Show me, where is this?" Or you've been to Hermitage, right? You realize, that the director of Hermitage, Piotrovsky, is legendary figure, right? Because he's the second Piotrovsky in command of it. His father, it's an institution, and it's a family running an institution. It's quite impressive and very unusual in that respect. His father has been in charge of the Hermitage since, forever. I think since before World War II, I think, right? At least since the 1940s.
After Joseph Orbeli.
Yeah. Yes, so Orbeli in the 1920s and 30s, I think, right? And Piotrovsky was conducting excavations essentially in Yerevan. Because this is he couldn't really go anywhere abroad, but Armenia is as close as you get to Mesopotamia. And within the confines of the city of Yerevan, in city limits, you have a mighty fortress. Remember Urartu, Erebuni, 7th century BC fortress, and they find it's very imposing walls, the Assyrian-style walls, and they find there one after another these bronze objects, gold. This is the pride of the Hermitage gold collection there. And Professor Piotrovsky marries an Armenian archaeologist, and yes, Piotrovsky, who is running the Hermitage now, is their son. And so there is a very special connection, between St. Petersburg or Leningrad in that time and Yerevan, and it lasts decades. It starts in the 1930s, because architects are coming from here and working, to build Yerevan, and there are not as many connections. One big connection to single out with Tbilisi, for instance, but there are so many lesser connections, and they are extremely strong. Georgia is the best dream of Soviet intellectual. That it's freer. Soviets never really controlled the Caucasus very tightly, as you will see. So there was always some kind of certain laxity to the way politics were conducted in the Caucasus. Come on, relax. This is not exactly Soviet Union. People will tell you, and. Of course, why it is not exactly Soviet Union, because cynically, if you wish to say, because it really doesn't matter very much for Soviet Union. These are small republics, except for Azerbaijan with its oil. They don't matter. They never mattered for the Soviet Union economically very much. They don't matter today economically very much either. And that's and well, these are not the places where exactly like in the Urals they are making so many tanks. Some airplanes, some in Georgia, some robotics in Armenia, but these are not terribly important republics to control. Well, as long as there is no anti-Soviet activity, as they called it, on a massive scale. And then also because there are big family structures there. Like my big fat Greek wedding, right? So there are big families in all of these towns, and these family structures are networks of support by which people achieve their results. And there are many anecdotes, difficult to verify, showing that actually even in times of Stalin's purges, local officials try to shield some of the more valuable, as they believed, members of local intelligentsia from repression. Like, they demanded, to deport from Armenia a certain number of intelligentsia who are kind of anti-Soviet. So they would grab, illiterate people, and mostly, just people from vagrants, vagabonds from the railway station. It's an anecdote. And it's told by the people who are members. I must make a disclosure here, that these are anecdotes coming from the members of Soviet elite, saying that, but we never really followed through the orders coming from Moscow, because we understood that, in Moscow they will change their mind next year. Like, things like Trotsky was such a great hero, and now Trotsky is the greatest evil. That today Stalin is great hero, and Yezhov, Commissar Yezhov is his, biggest helper. Tomorrow, Commissar Yezhov is enemy of the people. So just wait, and it will change again. And in the meantime, what was the motivation there was? And it's the same in Tbilisi. They're telling me that. But you are going to live in this town. It's getting impressive today, but welcome. Evidently, you got a visa. Was a successful trip?
Yes, it was, in the end.
In the end. Is it over? Okay. Everything that ends well, ends well. so welcome. You have a visa now. So what happens, okay, story time. We've been almost 45 minutes into this. It's a genuine story, but the story is actually from the times, for you to understand also something about the so-called totalitarian character of Soviet Union. The story is actually from Tajikistan. Simply because it so happened that through one of my friends was Azerbaijani. And his wife happened to be daughter of a very important man in Tajikistan. So I have this, internal stories. In the end of 1930s, first secretary of Tajikistan's Communist Party, Comrade Gafurov, is called urgently to the Kremlin. Urgently, they fly him. There are not very many airplanes in 1938, but they fly him by German Junkers airplane, to Moscow, and they rush him to the Kremlin, and nobody greets him in Moscow. He comes to the Kremlin, and everybody, looks the other way. They're all completely busy, absorbed in what they're doing. So he's sitting in Stalin's anteroom, waiting. It's really bad in the sense, But Stalin hasn't killed him yet, so he's still hoping, to survive. He spent 5 or 6 hours, very, very tense, waiting to be seen by Stalin. And finally, Paskrovyshev, Stalin's aide, shows him into the room, and Stalin stands there with his pipe, without saying hello or anything. He said, Gafurov. At the time, when the entire people of Soviet Union is engaged in exposing spies and traitors, you have uncovered only 12,000 Trotskyists in your republic. How do you explain this? And Gafurov immediately realized what was the best strategy. What would you think would be the best strategy in such a situation? How would you save yourself? What would you tell Stalin? That you're not killing enough people, enough intellectuals.
Find another 20,000.
Well, this means that you have to find them somewhere. And Stalin will think that, yeah, you are weak. So no. Gafurov played an Oriental simpleton with very heavy accent, Tajik accent, Persian accent. He said, Comrade Stalin, such a backward republic We have more donkeys than intellectuals. Where would they get Trotskyists? Yeah, and Stalin laughed at this and said, okay, you can go. Yeah. Do you realize how much Gafurov was valued back in Tajikistan for saying this? Tajik intelligentsia loved him for this. They knew, and he was a really smart guy. And one more story about Gafurov. Already in the early 1970s, it's a different period, 1970s, Brezhnev. Gafurov is a member of Academy of Sciences by that time, and he's promoted to being director. He's academician, and he's director of Institute of Oriental Studies in Moscow. In this capacity, he is sent to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia never had diplomatic relations with the USSR, but it's an important country, so he goes as part of the Soviet Committee for Solidarity with Peoples of Asia and Africa, something there. And Gafurov, this is still, Oriental despot, if you wish. This is what he knows. What is power in his part of the world? So he goes through customs. Well, of course, he's member of Central Committee of the party. He goes in Moscow and Sheremetyevo, through customs without looking at them. But the customs, of course, they recognize him, but they stop a bunch of professors. They're famous professors. They're full professors, authors of great books, but they're stopped for search at customs. And Gafurov, without moving his head, almost like this, let them through. My man. My man. These are my men. Let them through. Мои люди. Пропустить. So they go through. They come to Saudi Arabia, and in Jeddah, the Saudis basically forgot about them. They said, well, they're very busy. They have Hajj. This is the month of Hajj. Pilgrims are coming to Mecca massively. So they leave the Soviet delegation in a hotel not far from the Red Sea and say, well, enjoy yourself. So for 3 or 4 days, everything is paid. And the head of Soviet delegation, Gafurov, disappears. This is a scandal. Did he defect to the West? Was he killed? Was he abducted? But there is not even a Soviet embassy in Saudi Arabia. There is no KGB in this country at all. So where are they going to call? So a day very tense passes. The second day they are very tense. They all come to dinner together. No Gafurov. The third day Gafurov shows up like nothing ever happened. Say, hello, why? Well, you're missing me. So eat everything. And his head is cleanly shaven. And so, of course, this man's being good specialist in Islam, they immediately realize, what happened. That he sneaked away to Mecca and performed Hajj. And they start teasing him, Comrade Gafurov, come on. You're a member of Central Committee of the party. And you believe in this superstition. Why do you need this Hajj? You're a member of Academy of Sciences. I said, my dear, if you lived as long as I did, you would know how life is full of vagaries. Today you are a member of Central Committee, and maybe tomorrow you will be happy that an illiterate peasant somewhere in a mountainous village in Tajikistan will kneel and kiss your green robe of a holy Haji. So he was creating every kind of social capital he could. Right? Okay, member of Central Committee, but also Haji. So it doesn't really contradict to each other. This is the man who remembered Stalin. This is the man who really knew what is survival. This is the man who never, ever just placed all his eggs in one basket. He was looking ahead, and he knew that anything that may help you down the road should be collected. This is basically the main wisdom of politics. And this is why I'm telling you these stories. You have to realize why there is such an impressive survival of national cultures in the Caucasus. Less so in Central Asia, because it was, the leap was, of course, greater, but even in Tajikistan, many of people made it, because local cultures, look what happened in Central Asia. Local cultures were made illiterate overnight by the decision of Moscow to change their alphabets to Russian, to Cyrillic. Right? Tajik language went from, it's basically Persian, it's Farsi. Tajik language went from their own alphabet almost overnight to Russian alphabet. Not their own, I'm sorry. The alphabet was Arabic. of course, but they had an old alphabet which made them part of the Muslim world, and that's exactly, of course, what the Soviet Union didn't like. So they changed the language to Russian Cyrillic alphabet, which means that overnight your literacy rate is down to 0.0 something percent, right? And nobody can read and write it. And still, they created a fairly impressive Tajik and Uzbek intelligentsia. And in the Caucasus, this actually never happened. In the Caucasus, you have Armenians and Georgians with their own alphabets, very, very entrenched culture. And it's another anecdote about Stalin, that somebody asked Stalin in 1937, that why don't you change Georgian alphabet to Russian? All alphabets are being changed. And Stalin, allegedly, this is an anecdote. But anecdote means, that the beliefs of people who think that this is believable. So Stalin turns to Paskrobyshov, his sidekick, and says, what do you think? I am less a Georgian than those Georgians in the government in exile in Paris? What would be the reaction of Georgian society if we change the alphabet? This alphabet is 1,500 years old. That's true. Yeah, so Stalin actually knew what he could do, and he knew what he probably shouldn't do, or shouldn't try to do. There are other jokes like Konstantin Gamsahurdia, one of the greatest Georgian writers, and father of Zviad Gamsahurdia, who becomes the rabid nationalist leader of Georgian pro-independence movement in '89. So you have it in my book. So there you can read about Gamsahurdias. But their story, they tell about the survival of Konstantin Gamsahurdia. So why Gamsahurdia survived the Great Purges? Because they say that one night, as it happens, a group of NKVD officials come knocking on his door. And one thing, and this is not very, very credible, because did they really ever, was it a charade or what? Would they allow anybody to make a phone call? But Gamsahurdia said, I want to make a phone call to Lavrenti Beria, the head of Georgia at that time. And he calls him, they actually connected him, he calls him and said, Lavrenti, I knew that you hate me. But I did not realize that you have no respect at all for Georgian culture. Because I'm a Georgian writer, and you sent all your henchmen, and they are all Armenians. So that was the joke, Abakumov and others, they're all Armenians, so Georgian culture will never absolve you if you kill me with the hands of Armenians. Beria allegedly, laughed at this and said, okay, pass the phone, to these guys, and they left. So this is a joke, probably, but it actually, reflects. What does it reflect? And it's actually quite interesting, something important about the formation of identities among the Soviet leaders at that time, that Beria actually cared about his reputation in Georgia. In what respect? Look, even when they abolish nationalities in Northern Caucasus, right? They deport Chechens, they deport Ingush to Central Asia. They bring Ossets from South Ossetia, which means from Georgia, to Ingushetia. So okay, this place is now empty. We just deported the population, so they bring Ossets from Georgia into the North Caucasus. So then Georgia becomes slightly more Georgian. And Muslims from Adjaria, Muslim Armenians, Mesheti Turks, are deported to Uzbekistan. And to this day, no Georgian government, very democratically, but still, they wouldn't agree to resettle them back. Right, and the next in line were the Abkhaz, probably, but Beria died, as you know, under very special circumstances in 1953. He was killed by his fellow members of Politburo. And that kind of stabilized the map of the Caucasus. I want you also not to make another common mistake, and especially because I am ethnic Armenian in part, that you must not underestimate Azerbaijan. But when we speak about Azerbaijan, the most important thing is we are actually talking about Baku, the city of Baku. And this is an incredible town. This is the site of the first oil boom in the world. It's before American oil boom, it's before Oklahoma. Brothers Noble, and of course, so many other people coming there and creating this hub of culture, which endures virtually to our day. But in the 1960s, for instance, Baku was the Mecca, for what? What art thrived in Baku? Everybody in the Soviet Union, they were dreaming. Not everybody, but people who were much into this kind of music. Jazz. Jazz. Baku was the place, where you could have jazz festivals. And Baku also, they had great films, and you will see, of course, to this day, Rustam Ibragimbekov is one of the most important filmmakers. He's an icon of not Azerbaijani, Soviet film, to this day. And his brother is what? Mahmud, Murat Ibragimbekov, the brothers Ibragimbekov. KVN story, club, what is KVN in Russia? The club of student clubs making jokes again. It's a competition in making jokes among student teams. Extremely it's an institution in this country. Extremely popular in the 1960s. And it produced some of the most important personalities, like, who is Yuli Guzman? Yuli Guzman is the KVN chief of captain of their team. Later becomes the most important producer in post-Soviet history in cinema. All right. Now, where we started, part of all this is, of course, major part is food. And food is a ritual. You also have to understand, we're going there. Yesterday I've been to a restaurant and asked to introduce me to the cook. So we tasted, what is there. And we ask you to cook kind of real stuff without concession to local tastes. So which means that there will be bones in meat because it gives taste, not just chicken breast, white chicken breast, but there will be bones in chicken. There will be an adequate amount of garlic, and salt, and there will be homemade wine there. If we are, I realized it's a good place, so I came there with my wife yesterday, and I said, well, you have Chilean, Argentinian wine here, and they said, do you have cha-cha, which is grappa, Georgian grappa? And I said, for you, we do. It's not far from here, and it's 3 blocks away. Not far from, the Stiglitz drawing school on Soляной переулок. You'll see. So they will have a table, so it's our treat, and then you are vegetarian, right?
Yeah, but is it the Armenian restaurant?
No, it's Georgian mostly. No. So this is in a walking distance, The point was that we must get, something which is in a walking distance. So look, food, preparation of food in itself, starting with shopping for food, is a very important ritual. Like, why? Let me start with one simple question. It is a fact that the Sicilian mafia have life expectancy among the longest among criminals anywhere in the world. They live into ripe, good old age, into their 60s. While in Naples, the Neapolitan Camorra live into their 30s. What's the difference? Family. And what is central ritual for an Italian family? The ritual, So what do you do on Sunday?
You eat together.
You eat together. Have you seen Godfather, what is 2, when he says, you must learn how to cook for 20 men. When they're under siege, enemy gang is threatening to kill them, so you have to make pasta, for 20 men, because a day might come. So it starts with going shopping, with all this haggling in the marketplace, sniffing, so that this is the right food. The right ingredients, sniffing everything that. One more joke. Even in Chicago, I am buying in Sam's Club, actually, big supermarket, a piece of fresh. Well, they claim it is fresh lamb from New Zealand, packaged in plastic very tightly. And the man to whom I give my credit card, looks at the name on the credit card, and then looks at around. And, brother, I must not tell you this, but you are Armenian, brother. I said, yeah, I'm Armenian. So, I'm Assyrian. We are brothers. I cannot swindle on you. Why are you buying from us? This meat doesn't taste good. It smells wrong. Go on Divan Street, buy from the Muslims, from the halal shop. They bring sheep every morning from Indiana. It's fresh. Don't worry, that is halal. Halal means, that it's Muslim, that it's drained of blood. It's real stuff. So you smell everything, like, you build up. It's part of the emotional ritual. Once again, what is really all about is emotional bonding. And then, you bring it home. And you cook, and you take, this old pan your grandmother used, or, the recipe. Once again, what this is not so much about taste. This is about generations and generations. This is what my grandmother did, linking them together. And feeding children and telling them, that this is what we do. This is how we are. This is what, and this food means that this is what we are. And then finally, it's only finally people sit at the table, but also how they sit. That there must be a tamada, the elder at the table, at the Caucasus table, who is. It's very much like all these banquets of feudal lords, of course, that toasting with glasses. Drinking without toast is alcoholism. Drinking with a toast is already political work. This was the saying of my battalion commander, Ruslan Aushev, who later became president of Republic of Ingushetia. That you have to have a toast. Absolutely. But then, there are so many things like, in Kabarda, you will have to know that, you clean glasses, depending on your rank and stature. You ask the tamada, excuse yourself, and if you're late, you have to really beg pardon from the chairman, from everybody sitting there. May I please join? Will I be fined by having to drink 3 times more vodka than everyone else, and something like this? And there are all kinds of rituals there. And of course, you must always hold your alcohol. This is not about getting drunk. Actually, if you cannot hold your alcohol, you're a weakling. You must outdrink everyone else without falling under the table. Yes.
You don't drink at all.
It's going to be a difficult. Well, it's going to be difficult, but there is a situation. There is a story to that too. So you have to be inventive. My friend Dmitry Yefimovich Furman, who is a very prominent intellectual, and used to be advisor to Gorbachev and then to many other politicians like Yavlinsky, but always he is ultimate moral authority. That it's an awesome man, cannot be bribed, doesn't care about money or fame at all, and dresses like a Moscow dissident intellectual, cigarette between crooked fingers. Tamada in Abkhazia was desperate because you have to toast everyone at the table. And you have to tell, the stories about them and how great they are. So everybody feels great, and so we all feel great. So we will start, say with Patricia, say that something, about your ancestors, about your style, about your eyes, whatever, and then we will drink. Yeah, oh, absolutely. We have to, and then your future family. Because you remember, you're not alone. You're one. My father was always saying that you are not walking in the street alone. There are 20 generations of Derlugyans before you, and there are, God willing, 10 more generations. Your children, your grandchildren walking with you. So if you don't look tidy, you are a disgrace to the whole clan. Something like so. You have to drink to everyone, and the Tamada was really desperate about Furman. Like, what can you say about this man who doesn't drink? At that time, and he said, well, and let's drink to our guest, to his modesty, because he's the paragon of modesty. The skromность. Something. So being a Tamada is very difficult, but also very honorable. Famous Tamadas are invited from wedding to wedding, from funeral to funeral, because these are the people who are kind of centerpiece of everything. And you must learn from early age, how to be a Tamada. And by the way, if you read my book, you will see, that finally read my famous book. That just this morning learned, that head of the Republic of North Ossetia has my book on in the desk. He showed it to one of his aides, who happens to be my friend. And of course, not knowing that he's my friend, saying, see this book, I can lend it to you, but you must return it. So maybe even bureaucrats will start reading it. The title of Musa Shanib in Russian and in English is president of the Mountain Confederation of the Caucasus. But in the Caucasus, his title was different, Tamada. He was not president, he was Tamada, Конфедерации, Tamada, they pronounce it, Tamada, Конфедерации горских народов. So this means, that this is one big table, and everybody, of course, drinking at this table becomes brother and sister, and so, which means what? Why? Why this bonding? Remember? What are the guarantees, precarious guarantees of life in stateless society?
How many brothers you have?
They should know. Come on, watch it.
Trust.
To eat together.
Timothy Earl, How Chiefs Come to Power. The famous quote. Hospitality or
being fierce.
or vendetta. The two sides of the same coin. Because at table you make friends. If you know, there is a great book by Harvard anthropologist, I'm blanking his name, but it's called Social Construction of Indifference. It's about Greece, the social Herzfeld, Michael Herzfeld, I think. No? Well, the social construction of indifference. I could be wrong. It's about Greece. Why the cultures with greatest hospitality are also the most corrupt. And the other way around. Like, really, Scandinavians are not very famous, today at least, for their hospitality, but these are also, less corrupt countries. So why is that? Because, as he says, that people in Greece, they conduct their affairs across the table, banquet table or bureaucratic table. And they merge the two, because they make bonds across the... So if you must read at least one book after this class. And that would be Fazil Iskander, Sandro of Chegem Stories. Iskander, I-S-K-A-N-D-E-R. Iskander. Fazil Iskander. You would have a lot of fun. This is kind of Mark Twain or P.G. Wodehouse of the Caucasus. These are short comical stories, most of them. Very, very famous. So it's a treat, in fact. But it's one of the stories is about Uncle Sandro, who is like a trickster coming from one story to another. Uncle Sandro is looking for a prince who would be from the same clan as the traffic policeman who had just fined him. Why? Because what do you do in the Caucasus? If traffic policeman stops you and issues a fine, you try. First of all, even before they issue a fine, you try to figure out whether you have been to the wedding together. And that failing, you start immediately, thinking, okay, do I know someone who has been to the wedding together with this traffic cop, and who can influence him? So you are immediately looking for back door ways of solving the problem. This very much undermines, of course, your state, because people have actually a very important choice to make between loyalty to their bureaucracy, to which they serve, and loyalty to the family. You think, that this is nice when people in, say, First Secretary in Tajikistan or Prime Minister of Armenia shields local intelligentsia against Stalinist purges. But he is not, in this instance, he is not behaving like a good bureaucrat. A good bureaucrat should have just killed people. He got the order, he must do whatever the orders say. But he starts thinking instead that, okay, I am an Armenian or I'm a Georgian, I'm going to leave, my family is going to live in this town for a long time with the families of other people, who probably I shouldn't do it. Right? And so the considerations of personal and local community level trump considerations of state. Ernst Gellner, remember the first lecture? Ernst Gellner, the famous author of Nations and Nationalism, used to say, that people from patriarchal society or traditional society are made of particularly corruptible metal. People who have no family are the best. They have no obligations. And that's why, by the way, you know about the Mamelukes in medieval times, when Mamelukes are children who were bought as slaves for Egyptian army, or for the Ottoman Sultan, the Janissaries. You heard about Janissaries or Yanichari. So these were children who were bought from Christian families. That was a point, actually, that they must not. It's an irony that in Turkish Empire, Muslims were not allowed to enter government service because they didn't trust them enough. Muslims have their families and clans. Military service was for foreigners. And military, and then becoming officials, becoming bureaucrats, ranking bureaucrats. So the Mamelukes and Janissaries were taken from their families when they were young. They were brought up, they were converted forcibly. Well, when 7-year, 8, 10-year-old, it's not much force that is needed. Converted to Islam and brought up as servants to the Sultan. Right? And why? Because these people would have no family. They become children of the Sultan. They're personally loyal to Sultan. This is one of the ways of circumventing the political and institutional problem of family ties in early societies, in traditional society. Today, it's basically like in Western Europe. The idea is that your service to government or to formal institution, trumps your personal obligations. That it's corruption, and it is corruption. When say you're a professor and you help during examination your niece. But elsewhere in the world, if you don't help your niece, you'll be considered to be a very bad relative, right? So this is what we're talking about, and don't you think, that this is just in the Caucasus. Of course, you realize that so many other countries work just like that, and that includes, of course, the city of Chicago to this day. You don't survive in Chicago politics very long unless you have good relatives and you have a reputation of being a good patron. Now, once again, now you know. What role does food play in all of this? A lot of role, a major role. It's a ritual bonding people together. But where does food come from? Let me come back to the earlier question, but you already know the answer. Why there are no Finnish or Scandinavian restaurants in America, or so few? Do you know much about Finnish cuisine? No, just you realize, Otto, you realize that Tatiana, that this is no offense. It's actually I'm going to praise you guys, But like, why there is no Finnish cuisine? Why there is Italian and French? Why there is Turkish? Let me go. Let me build a more elaborate trap for you. Like, how many cuisines do you know? Have you ever heard about Mozambican cuisine? No. Okay. New Guinea cuisine. All right. So how many cuisines do we have? Chinese. Like, go through your head and like how many restaurants do you know? Types of restaurants. Chinese, right? Chinese, Japanese, but these are kind of Japanese, Korean, and even Thai, Vietnamese. Even Tibetan, frankly, even although Tibetans would be very upset if I said that, but they're very similar to Chinese, right? Similar in the sense that it's rice, it's sticky rice, and it's mostly something, some vegetables or something, chopped finely over rice, right? Most of the time. So it's more or less kind of the basic structure of this cuisine is the same, and what this is, it's a world system. It's what we call, some people would say civilization, but it's actually a world system because there was Chinese Empire. What is the center? It's very clear what is the center here. It's Chinese Empire, and Korea, from the Chinese standpoint, Korea and Japan are the far west, or the far east, they call it. This is the far east. China is not far east. These are Far East. So these are satellites around Chinese Empire, right? Okay, let's move. And so there is Chinese High Court, the Emperor of China, and this is where they create this kind of strange cuisine. So of course, Chinese cuisine is notorious that they eat snakes, they eat jellyfish, they can cook anything. They eat swallow nests for soup, right? Do common people eat this stuff? No. This is all prepared for very special purposes. Very strange people like the emperor himself eat this. And then, remember Norbert Elias, manners spread eventually from court society. Because people in the localities, they want to emulate this. Oh, but we are going to entertain you almost like in the imperial palace. Have you heard? They eat jellyfish there. So that we are cooking jellyfish today. Now, next big civilization. What is the civilization of long rice pilaf? The basmati. But it starts, have you been to Indian restaurant? So it starts really in northern India. And mind it, northern India. Because there is southern India, which is Dravidian, which is quite different food. Mostly vegetarian, very, very spicy. We're talking about, Tamil Nadu, there. Southern India is very different. We're talking about northern India, and they are almost from Bangladesh. It's kind of some kind of flat bread. You can call it naan. Indian bread is called what? Naan. And
Roti.
what is roti?
I had it should add tomato there, but it's dough.
Okay, I want names, for flatbread. Pita. Greek is pita, and Armenian flatbread is called what?
Lavash.
Lavash. And Georgian flatbread is called what? Puri. Yeah. And so you move on and on and on. What's Arabic for flatbread?
They say
Hebel Arabic. Yeah, like pita, something flatbread. And it goes all the way to Morocco. So it's actually a huge expanse from Bangladesh to Morocco. And it's everywhere, more or less. There are local variations. But it's more or less, rice pilaf, how this, Greek food is actually very much part of this, sticky, it's stuffed grape leaves, some kind of sticky desserts, sweets are very sticky, coffee or tea. So you have a flatbread, and then you get into Europe and kind of big leavened bread. One more. Do we have enough time? Do you realize that what's the Russian for bread? Chleb. And it's the same root as the English word Lord. Did they ever explain this to you? No. Close. It's actually, they were quite pre-Christian at that time. The Gothic, both English and Russian inherited the word Lord in English and chleb. Chleb still survives in English as loaf. Chleb and loaf is the same. Yeah. Hlafvert is Gothic. In ancient Gothic language, Goths, Visigoths, Ostrogoths. In Gothic language, Hlafvert was the one who breaks bread, breaks and gives to his warriors. To you, to you, to you. Lady, by the way, was keeper of yeast, means, literally, means keeper of yeast. Because this was a yeast bread, this was expensive bread. Romans baked this kind of bread. Chleb is not a Russian word. A Russian word for bread is actually lepiocha, a Slavic word. Because lepite, what is lepite? Kneading dough, lepiocha. And then it's flat, Russians are ancient Slavs. Ancient Slavs, apparently, they also, how you make flat bread. You bake it inside hot oven. But this bread, which is kind of like this, it comes from Romans. And later, through France, spreads around. And just look at the names of wines you drink. The names betray the area of stabilization of breeds. Breeds means like everybody has grapes, but this grape is consistently giving you the same Cabernet, right? So you start calling it Cabernet. And what are other names, Merlot, Sauvignon, right? French. Do you know what is it? Pinot Noir, also French. Give me German names for wine. Riesling. Yes. From which part of Germany? It's Mosel. It's Mosel, you know, because there are not very many places in Germany you can grow grapes, right? Or Zinfandel. That's not from Germany. It's actually Dalmatia. So it changes hands. Yes, and then give me some Italian and Chianti, and in Spain, Tempranillo. Heard about this? Yeah, Tempranillo, and that's it. Right? Do you know of any English wines? No, because the climate actually limits us and then the consumption on this. Yes, but also, you know, look, you know, the climate is good for wine in Bulgaria. But do you know native Bulgarian wines? Kagor is a French province. It's a good example. Cahors. It's a French province of, you know, of Cahors. Hungary, it's, yeah, you have some Hungarian wine, but this is where it ends. Remember, which are the cultures that create high cuisine and wine as part of it? Those which have class societies. Once again, it's class. It's about class domination. Why there is no Finnish cuisine? Because Finland is a democratic peasant society, right? And peasants everywhere in the world eat very simple food. Yeah.
How about the British society? I mean, they have a class society, but it's just a matter of climate
Excellent.
as well.
Excellent. Very good question. Okay. What's the English word for pig's meat? Pork. And pork, is it English word? Is it Anglo-Saxon or it's French? What's the English word? The meat of cow. Beef. Bœuf. Right? The meat of sheep. How do you say it? Yeah, well, today they say lamb meat. No. It's, come on, native speakers. Mutton. Heard about this?
Yes.
Come on, it's mutton, mouton. And deer meat in English is what? Venison. So as you can see, you know, these are all French words. If you open Sir Walter Scott's Ivanhoe, you know, he has the first page is a conversation among two English peasants, and they're very upset that, you know, why is it, you know, the Anglo-Saxons, you know, why is it that while the pig is smelly, dirty animal and we have to take care of it, it's called Anglo-Saxon pig, but when it is slaughtered and served in Lord's table, it becomes pork in French. So now you know why, you know, because England was conquered by William the Conqueror and the guys, you know, and that's why also military terms in English language are all French. You know, all the, you know, sergeant, lieutenant, lieutenant, sergeant, captain, colonel, right? You know, they're all cuirass, melee, right? Épée, you know, they're all French. Yeah. In England, also, you know, I think, you know, what happened, what is important, that they democratized early enough. And so the feudal lords really didn't have much cuisine, frankly. They didn't care. Why? You know, because in medieval times, what really mattered was a lot of meat. So, like, feasts in medieval castles apparently were very, well, very fancy things, but boring in terms of cuisine, because they were just bringing, like, whole bulls, sheep, ducks, and they were, you know, how they were eating that. You know, no table manners that time, right? At all. And if you look peasant food, and look at the pictures by Bruegel or Bosch, right? So when they depict peasant carnivals, so you have pictures, you know, what do peasants eat for weddings? German and Dutch peasants, what do they eat? No, there is no meat. That's the most important thing. No, it's they bring big bowls. You know, two men are carrying it. It's a very big bowl with porridge. You know, they eat oatmeal. Like, you look at it. Oh, that's all? Yeah, you know, but you have a lot of beer. And it's probably very bad beer too. You know, but that's all. And the what English elite would drink? Would they drink ale with meat? No, wine. They drink wine. And how do they call their wine? They drink red wine. And they called it, what red wine? It's very important. Do you remember, that, okay, James Bond, Diamonds Are Forever? You know this great film? In the end, in the very, very end, when James Bond killed all these guys, there are two guys who are very, very creepy, probably homosexual types. And so, yes, Mr. Bell. So they're appearing in James Bond. He's on a big cruise ship. So they find. Remember those guys? A very, very creepy couple. So they appear as stewards. On this ship. So they're going to set the table for James Bond and his current girlfriend. And he asked them, so do you have claret? And they say, sorry, we don't have claret. We just ran out of claret. But we have Bordeaux, 1957, and yes. And James Bond takes, 2 skewers with meat, blazing skewer, and kills them all. Said, you are not what you seem, because claret is Bordeaux. And they didn't know this, right? So that's why he kills them. You have to understand, the English. Yeah, the English word for Bordeaux wine is claret. And that's why, the center of 100 Years' War, the center of support for England against France was Bordeaux. To the very last moment. And that's, by the way, why you have so many beautiful castles around Bordeaux. All these Saint-Emilion, all these tourists are now coming and they look at Saint-Emilion and say, oh, how beautiful, so rural France, southwest, all these, Saint-Emilion wines. Why? Because the French, in the very end, they overran British positions so rapidly that all these fortresses stood intact. They just surrendered. These are English-built fortresses against the French. And why Bordeaux was on the side of England? Because look at the map. From Bordeaux, you put a big barrique, this barrel, right? What coopers make. Barrel of wine. You put it on a boat, and it goes to England easily. But to Paris, overland is really difficult, right? So Bordeaux was always supplying England with clarets. So yeah, it would be probably a very boring kind of menu because English would eat a lot of meat, upper classes. And then when this became possible for the lower classes to eat a lot of meat, in the 19th century, in the 18th and 19th century, they would just eat a lot of beef. They never invented really much of variety of food. So I don't know actually. One of the areas I don't know why English food is what it is. What it was until. Yes, in mitigation they do have scones. Yeah, and fish and chips. Yeah. All right, but we already answered in one very important question. Also, why only the countries which had a lot of class differentiation have cuisine, and that's why you shouldn't really expect very much. It's good food, but you shouldn't expect much variety from Chechen food. For instance, Chechen food is basically dumplings in garlic sauce. No, it's good, but once, I'm coming to Moscow and my mother-in-law is looking at me with horror and saying, what did you do? The Chechens are looking for you all over Russia. This is like a Chechen mafia or more than so. But the rumor was that, I had 2 Chechen professors in Chicago, took them to a Georgian restaurant there. And the Georgian restaurant, it was Wednesday, was closed. I called them and said, hey, I will spend, $300-400 with you. Open it up. So they did open, and in Moscow, they spread the rumor that, in Chicago, there is an Armenian professor, and for our ambassador in America, he opened a closed restaurant. На санитарный день был закрыт. So if now we don't reciprocate, with a banquet, so the Chechen diaspora were looking for me all over, and it was awful because they don't drink vodka. So as for a Christian, they bought me a whole bottle of Putinka, put on the table, and made sure that we bought it just for you because nobody. And they were absolutely sincere about it. Nobody drinks here, though, just for you. I was like. About all the Caucasus hospitality, but it's simple, it's good, but simple food. Now, where food is going to be very elaborate, it's going to be Azerbaijan and Armenia. And is Armenian, have you ever tasted Azerbaijani food?
Yes.
PT. Okay. Is it very different from Armenian? No. It's very embarrassing, But I once had a big discussion with Galina Vasilievna Starovoitova. You probably know, famous ethno politician in this town. She was killed. She was from St. Petersburg. She was assassinated and became sort of a martyr for the Russian democratic cause. And she was, like many Russian Democrats, she was a true believer in democracy, in westernization, in modernization. And Starovoitova once, commenting on my presentation, said, Georgii has just demonstrated, brilliantly, that in Nagorno-Karabakh we have the conflict of civilizations, that Islam and Christianity. I said, when did I say this? Horrible thing. That the biggest problem in Karabakh is actually separating Armenians from Azeris. They don't know, often they don't know themselves. They eat the same stuff, they listen in villages. Of course, Armenian intellectuals would prefer them, their peasants, to listen to Aram Khachaturian or to Komitas, to classical music. But in reality, what they actually listen to in villages and in wedding parlors, it's indistinguishable from Persian music and from Azerbaijani music. And the food is exactly the same. So it will be mostly, it's actually very good food, but it's mostly not Caucasian. It is mostly Iranian. It's a good variety of northwestern Iranian food. In Armenia, however, because Armenia is high in the mountains, people everywhere eat what they can find locally. So in Armenia, you're not going, because it's too high in the mountains, you're going to have big problem with fats. You think that low-fat diet is good today for you, but this is only since the 1960s that people think so. Like, what do you use to cook? You use either oil or butter. But to have butter, you have to have a lot of grass. Right? Basically, you have to live in a place like Denmark to have a lot of butter. And in Armenia, it's a land of stones. You cannot have much butter, sheep butter, sheep at most can provide you with cheese, but not butter. What are you going to eat? And olive oil is inaccessible because it's too high in the mountains, it gets cold. So what is going to be the source? And pigs are not very, very suitable animals for mountains. It's not about Islam so much, but what are the biggest pig-eating cultures? So Germans, right? Who eat pigs?
Oh, Chinese.
Ukrainian.
And Chinese, absolutely. Germans and the neighboring Slavs and Balts, right? So it's basically Germanic peoples in the north and Poles and Balts and Ukrainians. Ukrainians are, all these jokes about, they're addicted to pig. Yeah, so Ukrainian is going through the customs and they ask him, do you carry any narcotics with you? And he said, yeah. Where? So he opens a big piece of smoked pig lard, salo. And they look but if only you knew how addicted I am. No, but this is not a narcotic. If only you knew how addicted I am. Or, yes, a couple years ago, Odessa chocolate factory issued the famous, the Ukrainian dream, lard in chocolate. Christmas present. But okay. Back to this, so all right. Pig eaters are Germans, Slavs, and Chinese. What do Chinese and Germans have in common? What makes them pig eaters? In their peasant culture. Think about this. Come on, they live in big villages. What do pigs eat? Yes, hardware. Yeah.
Refuse.
They eat leftovers. Pigs are marvelous. They transform garbage into fat. Yeah, the refuse, this is very, very important. Pigs are very important for sedentary population. Why Arabs don't keep pigs?
Because
They're
dirty animals and they eat everything.
They're nomadic. Bravo. Imagine you have to herd pigs in a desert. How are you going to do this? How are you going to keep pigs in the mountains? Right? Pigs are animals suitable for plains villages with a lot of fields. so that people have a lot of leftover, from whatever, grains, potatoes, right? So you are not going to have many pigs in the Caucasus. In fact, pigs really appear only with Russians in the last 100-150 years. Armenians are Christian, but they don't eat until recently, until 50 years ago. No, they didn't eat pig. It would be mostly sheep, mutton, and to some extent beef. But beef is also very expensive because it's a big animal. Costs a lot to raise this animal. So there would be chicken, also maybe not very many ducks either, or geese. Okay, so where are you going to get what is the fruit which can provide enough fat?
It's
Think.
это желудь.
Желуди. Acorn. Как из желудей, из них можно... No, acorn, no. Think about it. Walnuts. Walnuts. So you will see, that you will have satsivi tonight, and it's made with walnuts. What do walnuts do to you? They fatten you up. Walnuts have fat. And Armenians and Georgians, but pay attention, Western Georgians. Eastern Georgia, Tbilisi and that area, will be still too close to Azerbaijan. They have great wine. That's where wine comes from. Georgian wine is not from entire Georgia. Once again, don't you think that there is such a thing as national food. Because you have these very general areas like Chinese, Japanese, Indo-Chinese, whatever. You have the big area from northern India to Morocco. You have the Western European, which is mostly French-Italian. French-Italian, there is hardly any Spanish input there. Where you have class societies and enough food to invent high cuisine. Because peasants everywhere eat very simple food. Some kind of stew or porridge. Because they have to consume what they have. And then at the local level, you have a lot of variation. Like every village, every town, maybe every housewife would have their own recipe. So you cannot really speak about Italian food. There is no Italian food because there is Piedmont and then there is Sicily. Right? They're completely different parts of Italy, completely different food. You have polenta and you have pasta in southern Italy, right? So what is happening in the Caucasus is exactly the same story. In Tbilisi, traditionally, no longer today, but historically 100 years ago, 150 years ago, what Russian officers described, food was essentially Iranian. Because Iran is the country where they invented 200 varieties of rice pilaf. And then rice yellow because of saffron, red rice, all kinds of rice, and they mix them together. It's unbelievable, Iranian pilafs, how many things. And that would be the food of Eastern Georgia. But Western Georgia is actually very, very mountainous, and there are swamps there. What is important, they have swamps, bolota, in Mingrelia. In Armenia, you don't have many swamps, but you have lots of mountains. In the mountains, you have to rely mostly on wild food. By the way, the same story with France or Italy. Some of the most expensive stuff in France and Italy or in Switzerland, right, like the truffles, the mushrooms, they come from mountains. And these is hunting and gathering techniques. Wild boar, right, other mushrooms as well, and acorns and whatever. In Armenia, they use about 40 different plants year-round, which are dug out, from the mountain slopes. Many of them don't have even names in just Latin name and Armenian name. What is Siber, right? Or Biber. Well, you translate it into Russian, it sounds like nothing. Like dandur. Dandur is, what is dandur in Russian? Portulak.
Maybe
Prosverniak. Shpinat is spanach. Prosverniak, does it sound like anything familiar to you in Russian? So, these are some kind of succulent plants up there in the mountains, and especially earlier in the year, like February, March, people are starving for vitamins. And the first plants like asparagus, sparja, like asparagus, are beginning to emerge in the mountains, and you see old women with big sacks, with literally with a stick, just digging them out, and you boil this and eat it boiled or with walnuts or with sour cream, because what you have, right? All kinds of this kind of, or you can dry this food. This is aveluk. You can make braids, like women's long hair braids. You braid them, dry, and eat during winter. Georgians use many more wild plants, especially in western Georgia, because they have big forests there, or used to have big forests. Almost like in southwestern France, almost like in the Pyrenees in Spain. That's where good food comes from, also in Europe. Why? Because you have very, very tart plums, alicha. They're wild plums, and really you cannot eat them as such. So what do? You do some kind of sauce made of this plum. It's called tremale. So you will taste tremale tonight. What also can you do with this? It's actually a good source of vitamins. So you can boil, in a big cauldron made of copper. You boil copper because your syrup gets preserved better, in copper. Why you make beer in copper vats, right? So it's a vat. You know what is vat, right? This big cauldron, and you boil juice from these plums for a long time until it recedes completely. All the vapor is gone, and by that time you can do several things. You can just pour it on a clean stone, and it becomes like paper. And eventually you can roll this plum sauce into paper, and during winter you just add a little bit of hot water to it, and you chop something else in it. So you have already very tart base for soup, and you add something, whatever you have, peas, potatoes today, and you have a soup. Even if you don't have meat. So we will taste various things of this kind. So most of this food are local adaptations. Now to finish all this lecture and go into film. Historically, it will be very funny probably to you. That what today is the most national food was considered to be peasant food. Like, our ancestors used to eat, the dolma. Today, for dolma is from the Turkish word dolmek. Those of you who have been to Turkey, you probably know dolmuş is marshutka in Turkish. Why? Because they squeeze people inside, squeezing in, dolmuş, dolmek, and that's why dolma. Dolma is, in the Caucasus, is made of meat. In the Middle East, because it's so much hotter and they don't have much meat, Dolmadaki, yeah. So it's, when we come, of course, to Greek restaurant, we get flabbergasted, like, how do you eat this? It's just rice. It has to. Hummus, they don't make in the Caucasus. Now?
Lobio, though.
Lobio is a different thing.
It's similar, though.
Yes, I agree, actually, but it's, similar, except you're going to taste, I hope, also Georgian dumplings. They're called hinkali. And there is a story about this. They ask a Georgian, some Russians, asking him, Gia, explain, what is hinkali? Your famous hinkali. And the Georgian, always speaking very slowly, to have more sense. So, you have this pelmeni. You know pelmeni, right? And hinkali is completely different. So it's actually, it's like pelmeni. It's a dumpling. It's a big dumpling. And what? So you will explain how to eat. Yeah. So you have to take it by the, you bend the dough together and make a twist. And this is what you don't eat. You take it, and if you're a real connoisseur of hinkali, you take it by this ending, right? And take it upside down, because there is a lot of juice from the meat inside. It's like chicken Kiev, and it's very difficult to eat. I don't trust myself, so I usually try to avoid it, although I like it very. So you don't eat it with utensils, yeah, because otherwise you lose everything inside, and you have to bite it and then suck it in.
But first you have to eat and drink, and find
Yes,
in
super.
Siberia around Baikal.
Kazi?
Поз.
Поз.
Вот это буряты.
Maybe. Because it comes actually from China, as you realize, you know.
Same thing.
Yeah. In general, to conclude this lecture, you know, I will quote a great American textbook of sex. And why I realize, you know, it's called The Joy of Sex, and I think it's a very reasonable book, because in the end, you know, of course, they go through all this Kama Sutra, how many positions, like position number 15, 16, 28. But in the end, they say that, but remember, human body naturally comes only with one front, one back, and two sides. The number of possible positions and combinations is not infinite. So this is actually a very, very good reminder that variety of human behavior is not very great, simply because what can you do with your meat? So you make, you know, like what else, you know? So you make, you know, when you have a little bit of meat and you have dough, so you can, you know, put meat in dough, and you can then, if you boil it, you get dumplings. If you bake it, you get pirashki, right? You know, if you deep fry it in oil, you get chebureki, right? And you can probably, when you're, instead of dough, it is breadcrumbs, you get Vienna schnitzel, right? But it's the same story all over again, right? But what we really value is the tiny additions to it. So Vienna schnitzel, however, is not exactly the same as Sibirsky pelmeni. Although the principle is actually close, if you think about it, you know, that it's very much like dogs, you know, that big shepherd dogs, small dogs, they're all dogs, and they're all actually wolf. But what we value is that there is a variety of dogs. And that's what you are going to taste tonight. All that food is very dear to Russians, because these are, you know, kind of memories of good summers somewhere in Abkhazia before there was a war. Much of this food is glorified, you know, through the Russian literature, because, of course, what happens in the 1820s, so many Russian officers come to the Caucasus, and then they start coming back, bringing their new taste, their Cherkesskas, you know. Pushkin was there, Lermontov was there, Leo Tolstoy was there, and so many others. So they bring Cherkesska coats with Hazari. Remember now what is Hazari, right? And daggers, and the Caucasus pistols, and food, and Georgian wine, and eventually Armenian cognac, although Armenian cognac was started by a Russian and as recent as 1887. And you cannot call it cognac, because only French can call cognac cognac. So it's brandy, but of course in Armenian you still write Haikakan cognac, you know, so it's Armenian cognac. So, and yes, and you have all kinds of other brews, you know, because like when you grow corn, maize, what can you make out of it? Basically you can make polenta, or you can make some kind of pirozhok. Call it mchadi, you will taste it. When you have, you know, you squeeze, how do Italians make grappa? Grappa is made of what?
It's from the leftovers of making wine.
Leftovers of making wine. So like you squeezed your grapes for wine juice. But then you still have a lot of grape juice there. And so how do you use that? So you push hot water through it. It doesn't make good wine, but it makes some kind of, you know, some brew. And this brew is not very drinkable, so you distill it. Distillation in Arabic is called, actually Novace should know these words, like, you know, they're arak. Arak. But what rak means in Arabic? Arak. Rak. Raki? No? No, it means, maybe it's classical Arabic. It should mean sweat.
Ara also is not rak. Ara
Ara.
means the vodka thing and the sweat in the same time.
Sweat.
Ara.
Mm-hmm. Sweat, because it's sweating, you know, distillation is the process of sweating. So you collect sweat from wine. Or you collected spirit. And spirit in Arabic is alcohol.
They say alcoholic drink is like spiritual drink.
Yeah. So it means, literally, in Latin it is spirit, spiritus. Right? Spiritus is spiritus sanctus. It's spirit of wine. You know, because you distill, возгоняете, душа вина. It's the spirit of wine. Spirit, alcohol in Arabic, or arak. the sweat of wine. It's sweating. Or people can just say, cha-cha. Armenians would call it ohri. So there are all kinds of local names for this. That you can call it schnapps, you can call it calvados. Calvados is made of apples, right? If you make it out of apples, it's calvados. If you make it out of plums, in the Balkans, it's called slivovica. Slivovica, right? If it's made out of apricots, it's called palinka in Hungary, and so forth. Or maybe just schnapps, right? Apricot would be called schnapps. Wheat.
You can call a lot of kinds of liquor schnapps, after schnapps.
Yeah. So,
it's all schnapps.
yeah. So you have all these varieties, but then comes the construction of identity. Some people say, that this is real Georgian food. That this is the way Armenians made their dolma. Yes, remember? But they used small leaves of krapiva. Krapiva is nettle. Nettle has very, very small leaves, so dolma comes in a very labor-intensive. But these people were so poor, they had to use nettle instead of grape leaves. And later, come Germans with, what is the favorite German vegetable? Kol, cabbage, kapusta. There was no kapusta. There was no cabbage in the Caucasus before Germans. Germans who came in the 19th century with Russians. German farmers. They brought cabbage, actually, and this is when you start making this very, very, with cabbage you can make enormous dolma. Russians call them golubцы. And so, but these are all varieties. And then, of course, some kind of an intellectual in the 1950s or 60s would say that, but this is what Russians do. We Armenians must use not even grapes, but nettle leaves. It's even more Armenian, the super duper Armenian. So at some point, so you have a creation of that this is Georgian food. And the Russian says, oh, real Georgian food. This is Armenian food. Nettle, it's a weed which, if you touch it, it poisons your skin.
It's used for what?
For dolma. Oh, my grandmother would make never make an omelet.
It's used for the...
Yes, probably.
Also for soup.
Yeah, for soup, yeah. My grandmother used it for frying eggs.
We use it for the sarma.
For sarma. Yes, you can, yes. All right, so did you work out your appetite?
Yes,
Now,
but now I have to go to the movie.
well, now you're going to see, so today is a long and funny day. So you're going to see a very famous film called Mimino. So I'll give you 5 minutes, right? Please be back and just...